And breaking tonight, Boris Johnson has declared unequivocally that he doesn't want to resign and will stay on as PM if the membership back him, according to the Daily Telegraph's Christopher Hope. He reportedly told Tory peer and the man behind the petition to get Boris on the leadership ballot, Lord Cruddas, at Chequers on Friday, that he wants to fight the next general election as leader of the Conservatives. And Boris defying the MSM-fuelled witch hunt and remaining in number 10 is a growing possibility as Tory members throw their support behind their Brexit delivering PM in their thousands. That's right, over 10,000 have now signed the Cruddas petition. An ex-Boris aide, Tim Montgomery, said at the weekend that sources close to the PM claim he's convinced he'll be back. Tim wrote on Twitter, Boris is telling aides he'll be PM again within a year. And it's not just sources suggesting a return for Bojo is in the works. He dropped a few hints himself during his bullish farewell display at the Dispatch Box last week.
Largely accomplished. For now, I want to thank everybody here and hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
And as we've seen in recent weeks, the majority of you at home want Boris to remain as PM, with one Twitter poll of mine of nearly 62,000 viewers showing overwhelming support for the PM. So, with surging support among Conservative voters, should Boris Johnson make a comeback as a PM in the future? Let me know your thoughts by emailing me at dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews while you're there, or go and vote in our Twitter poll, and I'll bring you those results very shortly. But to give their take and help you make up your mind, I'm joined by the man at the centre of the story himself, Tim Montgomery, who advised Boris Johnson in 2019. He's alongside another former Johnson advisor, Colville Ranger, who was with him when he was London Mayor, as well as the journalist and broadcaster Angela Epstein. So, Tim Montgomery, your revelation somewhat backed up by this Christopher Hope interview with Lord Cruddas, which is going to run on the Daily Telegraph tomorrow, where Boris tells Cruddas apparently at Chequers on Friday that he wants to stay as PM and he wants to fight the next general election as Prime Minister.
He does, yes, and I don't think any of us can be particularly surprised that a man who's broken many rules and twisted many others wants to stay as Prime Minister. He probably should have resigned as Prime Minister when such a large proportion of his parliamentary party voted a lack of confidence in him a few weeks ago. He didn't do the decent thing then. He had to be forced out by this cabinet, and he's never really come to terms with the problems and errors that he made. And you, Dan Wootton, naughty boy, talking about terms like coup, are undermining really what has been a proper process. You know, he lost the confidence of his cabinet. He lost the confidence of his parliamentary party.
Tim.
This wasn't a coup. It was a legitimate process which saw his premiership come to an end.
Whatever you think of Boris Johnson, how can you say this has been a proper process? He won that confidence vote categorically. And under the Conservative Party rules,
he won it quite narrowly. And then his cabinet rebelled against
premiership.
His cabinet rebelled against him very clearly. He only won the confidence vote very narrowly. Rather than taking on board some of the criticisms that his MPs made, he basically carried on regardless. He didn't change course. And fundamentally, Dan, I don't really understand why you remain loyal to Boris Johnson. He put up taxes. He put up regulation. He signed up to net zero commitments on the environment that will cost this economy incredibly dearly. He was the author of the lockdown that on this programme, night after night, you have criticised. He didn't tell the truth on multiple occasions, whatever his father has just said to you and Benjamin. I'm afraid he lost the premiership through his own actions, and he wasn't really, once he'd got Brexit done, a particularly Conservative Prime Minister.
Colville Ranger, what I'm so concerned about, and I obviously have criticised Boris for many of the points that Tim just raised, but what I am so concerned about is that we are heading towards Australian-style democracy. And if you follow Australian politics, and if you've followed Australian politics for the past decade, what you'll know is that the media pick and choose prime ministers over there. And in the course of about 6 years, there were 6 prime ministers, most of them not elected. There was paralysis in the country. And Colville, I think it's so important that we don't get into that system here in the UK where we feel like the mainstream media can choose or can at least depose a prime minister with incessant coverage of actually very small scandals to make it impossible for them to do their job.
You're right, Dan, and I think this is being magnified by all kinds of media, including social media, and that's why we're seeing a disproportionate amount of focus on certain things, and the media coverage has exaggerated since Tony Blair years, and we've seen 24-hour news media, the power of that media. It's great to see new channels emerging like GBNews and others that can sort of give other voices the spectrum and the ability to be heard. And I think what we have here is a popular politician still. Your polls show it, even with the members of the Conservative Party. I hear it as a person who's worked with him, and I know a lot of people who still come to me and they still want Boris to play a role going forward. But at this point, you know, he has had to take this call. He's been forced into taking a course of action because of the build-up of issues, and he'll admit mistakes that were made. But I think he will be back. That's what he's indicating. He's got too much of an appetite for politics. He's got too much knowledge, and he's too much of an electoral winning machine for the Conservative Party to ignore the capabilities and the skills that Boris Johnson has. And I think they'll come knocking on his door sooner rather than later when it comes to election and campaigning time, when they need their best political asset on the field.
Angela Epstein, do you think that Boris Johnson is the only hope to stop a Keir Starmer premiership? By the way, a Keir Starmer premiership probably backed up by the SNP, the Lib Dems and the Greens. That's what we're facing as a country.
Well, that principally is one of the things that I fear the most about this dog and pony show, that is the leadership contest. I mean, every time Sunak and Truss speak, they are diminished by the spectre of Boris Johnson. For every formidable policy they may field, I mean, words are words. They don't have the so-called rock star qualifications, which obviously is one thing, having public popularity, and the most important thing is being able to deliver policy. But ultimately, it was that rock star popularity that swept, the Conservatives into office with a historic landmark majority. And, the question is, should Boris make a comeback as a PM? To me, yes, thrice yes, because I don't want a Labour government propped up by Keir Starmer as much as everything else. Remember, Keir Starmer very happily campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn. I haven't forgiven him for that, amongst other things, apart from the fact that I don't know what he stands for. Couldn't pick him out in a lineup. But most importantly, I just think that at the moment, if you take the temperature of a lot of people, be it on social media, talk to people. I live in the northwest, where people actually talk to each other in cafes and on the street and stuff. And people say, well, I like Boris, and they see a duplicitous, a witch hunt, a Brutus-style coup or takeover, whatever. You can dress it up in any which language that you want, but the people want to speak. And the only way that we will decide whether Boris should be PM if it's put to the vote, not because a bunch of 40-odd MPs who only get their very existence because of the Boris factor have decided that it was time for him to move on and pushed him over.
Very good points there. Tim Montgomery, I want you to address some of them, but I also just want you to address, look, you know the Conservative Party, Tim, better than virtually anyone. You founded Conservative Home. You know this organisation. So as a result, surely, even though you think it's wrong, the concept of Boris staying as Prime Minister, you must know how concerning this is for the party, that there is this grassroots revolt over the decision.
Well, look, Dan, I don't rule out, if the Conservative Party regrets in a year that it's made a terrible mistake, Boris Johnson coming back then. And then I sent the tweet out that got retweeted in the way that it did, and I can understand after a period, perhaps Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. I think that's the likeliest of the two, final candidates, and she bombs. And I could see it, particularly if Boris stays in Parliament. I could see him coming back then. But it has to be a process that follows. You can't, go through one process. We're in the middle of a leadership election now and suddenly change the rules halfway through. We have to be patient now. And if
I understand
Boris
that point.
really
But Tim, I just wonder what you think about the members of the party. Because this is already 10,000, right? And it's growing by the day. And now that they have the endorsement of Boris, seemingly after this interview with Cruddas in the Daily Telegraph, I think the numbers are only going to increase. You could soon get to the point, Tim, where you're talking about 20% of the party membership having signed this petition. So I guess what I'm asking you is, does the Tory party risk a civil war here if they just ignore the grassroots members?
Well, it's 10,000 at the moment. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's 1/16 about, if it's right that we have 160,000 party members, that's only 1/16. And I think also, would Tory members be so pro-Boris if the leadership race, for example, had Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat, in the final two? I'm not sure that this is so much of a positive sort of groundswell of support for Boris as much as a groundswell of disappointment at the short list of two that MPs have put before the country. And I take the point, we all know, other panellists on here have just been saying there's lots of people who love Boris. I can tell you there's lots of former Tory voters who hate him now as well, unfortunately, who feel really let down by him on a number of issues. And opinion polls were turning against the Tories when he was in power. So I think we need to see an awful lot more support for Boris before we get carried away with
how do you respond to that, Angela?
Well, I think I think you've just been you've undermined your own argument, because you've said that the situation is not that everybody wants Boris, but there's disappointment in who the party have put forward in the leadership contest, which in itself is very, very revealing. It suggests that there isn't a natural successor, that the mechanics and all the infrastructure doesn't work well, because if this is the very best that they can dish up for us, which is something that the electorate haven't asked for. We talk about Boris, Partygate and all the things which were lamentable decisions. I agree with all those things. But our freedom was gifted by this man. Yes, OK, we went into lockdown late. I'm not dismissing that either. But when people start talking about him as a joke, I didn't think he was a joke when he was walking shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky in Ukraine. I didn't think so when he refused to close down the country over Omicron, and when we were first out the trap over the vaccine protocol. All of these things were big decisions. And I think because we're so consumed by the so-called buffoonery of it all and the personality politics and the telegenics, we forget some of these big things. And I just don't see these candidates being able to fill those shoes. And the very fact that you say that is this the best that they have shows you that maybe there aren't great minds in the Conservative Party putting forward adequate people to follow on from him. OK, final word to you, Colville Ranger.
Look, no one will hold a candle to Boris when it comes to campaigning, his electoral record, and that's what the Conservative Party members will remember. He is a winner, and he has been removed in a way that has upset people. But I also think he will be back. He gets the big decisions right. He will learn from this. He learns from history, and I think he'll come back stronger than before.